Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H Virtual Event Space. We have finally made it to part 3. We are mastering the art of music creation. We've had parts 1 and 2 already, so we'll get the links dropped in to the chat in the comments section for those of you joining us across the internet. But here we are, part 3, mastering the symphony. Of course, this series hosted by Focusrite, and for that, I'd like to welcome John D. Nicola back to the program. John, what's going on?
Hey, Derek. Thanks. It's really good to be here.
It's great to have you back. We finally made it. This is where we tie a nice bow around what we've created. So I'm gonna leave it to you because this is what you do and I don't. So I'm gonna be waiting in the wings here if any of you guys have any questions out there. But John, I'll see you in a bit for some Q&A.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thanks, Derek. Okay, so I'm just going to pull up my Pro Tools session from the last week. And hopefully you should be seeing that now. And so, yeah, just a very quick recap. This is part 3, as was mentioned just previously. And so what we've been doing on this series is we started with a brand new song from scratch. We created a new Pro Tools session and laid down some tracks during week 1. Then last week we talked about some mixing techniques, and so we basically mixed the track here as well. And so now I want to go ahead and talk about the last and final stage of production, which is mastering. And so for the mastering phase, we will checking everything here. Awesome. Just checking the chat there for a second. Sorry there. So for the mastering phase, this is the kind of, like Derek said, just kind of putting a bow on everything. And so there's a few different aspects to this. So what we want to do is we're going to take our track, we're going to export it into a single stereo file, and then we'll create a new session. And the first thing we'll do is get the file trimmed up, make sure everything is, it starts and it ends in the right spot. In this case, we'll be doing a nice old school fade out on the end of it. So that will be the first step. And then we're going to do a little bit of tonal adjustments. And then the most obvious step in mastering is bringing that volume level up to compete with, released material. So you may remember that when we were doing the mix phase, I left some headroom on the mix. So I was peaking at around maybe minus 3 dB, and I wasn't using all of the space here on my master fader. I was leaving some room for the mastering phase. And so this is the time where we're going to be able to take that headroom and use some compression and limiting and bring that volume level up so that your release can compete with other professional releases. And so we'll talk about all that's involved in all that. And we're actually going to go about it in 2 different ways, which is kind of fun. We were just talking about AI a little bit in the green room. And so we're going to do it ourselves in Pro Tools using some basic plugins that you should find in any software. So we'll go through that process so that you can kind of see what's happening. And we'll master the song. We'll bring it back in, compare it to the original. And at the very end, we're going to take our mix and drop it into an AI mastering service called Landr. Landr actually is included, 2 months worth of Landr is included with Focusrite Scarlett interfaces. So want to see how that works, and we'll kind of compare the two and see how we did compared to the AI system. So yeah, without any further ado, let's get right into it. So you can see my session here on the screen. This is basically unchanged from last week. And so all I'm going to do here is I could play the song. I'll play a few seconds of it just to give you a little minor refresher here. So here's what we have. Okay, that's good for now. We're going to be hearing a lot of this, so we'll stop it there. But that's our mix at where we left off last week. And actually, if I play this, I won't even have the, let's see here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to basically just export this the way it is because we're pretty much ready to go. So what I want to do is, now if I just go to File Bounce, it'll basically bounce to the end here. But I don't need all this extra stuff down here, so I'm just going to highlight a little bit of that verse there and then the beginning of my song. So I'm going to bounce out this section that's highlighted in gray. So I just go to do that in Pro Tools. I go to bounce. You might also see export in your DAW. But yeah, we're going to go to this option here, and you're probably going to have some of these similar options no matter what software you're working in. So a couple important things here. We want to make sure that our export file type is going to be WAV or AIFF. Those are both uncompressed file formats. And for the mastering stage, we definitely want to be working with an uncompressed file. So we're going to make sure that's selected. Now, if for some reason you wanted to export this directly to MP3 to maybe share it with somebody over the internet, you could do that as well. But for the mastering phase, make sure that we stick with one of our uncompressed formats. Along with that, you want to make sure we keep our bit depth and sample rate at least at what they were during this session, which is 24-bit, 48 kilohertz. So we're going to export at that. And yeah, that's all we have to do. So basically from here, I would hit bounce and export that file. And then I'm done in this session. I'm going to create a new session for mastering. Now to save us a little bit of time, I've already done that. So we're going to open up this new session here. Okay. And now in here is, right here is basically our mix that I just would have exported. So this is the same file. I didn't do anything else to the session. I just exported it right before we started and brought it in here so we'd be ready to go. And so here is our track. It's going to be exactly the same as it was before. And yeah. So the first thing we're going to do is, now that we have the file in here, we want to do those fades and trim things up. So the first thing I'm going to do is our ending in the verse here. We don't need to have all of that. So I'm going to create a fade where I just have a nice long old school fade out like we used to have back in the day. So I'm going to go to my Smart tool in Pro Tools by highlighting all three here. And if you move around here to the, which area is it here? Of course, it's not going to. Where is it hiding on me? Let's highlight that again. And we should get a little square, but we're not getting it. Alrighty. Well, we have it over here. So I'm going to go ahead and drag. Now, on the beginning, I don't need a big fade in. But what I do want to have is I'm going to zoom in on this. And I'm going to have a really short fade on the top here. So I'm going to hold Command. So I have a very exact amount. And I'm just going to fade right up where this transient starts. Now, that's just going to make sure I don't have any clicking and popping when the song starts. And so that's a very short fade. A lot of some software will actually apply that automatically, but you want to make sure you have something there if your song, especially if your song's starting right at the very top. And then likewise over here, we're going to want to put a fade on this, and we'll come back and we'll do that with our. We'll just do that with automation. So I can go to volume here, and I'll just draw a little. Here we go, and we'll just draw, boom, and we can go ahead and just drag that down. And now we have a fade out. So that's all we need to do as far as trimming the clip goes. That's all set to go. And so now we can kind of move into tone shaping and things like that. So you may notice down here, I do have a reference track. So it's a really good idea when you're mastering a song to have a reference track in mind. Now, not necessarily for volume, because you're not going to, especially if you're starting off with your tone shaping, the track you're referencing is going to be louder, but really just more for the overall tone. Kind of just helps keep things in perspective as far as what your goals are, for the mastering process. So I have a reference track here, a Jimmy Eat World song actually from the Futures album, the first track. I'm not going to play it here because I don't want to have the stream shut down. But that chorus in that song is really nice and full, a lot of things going on, kind of like my master here. So I did reference that track a little bit. The only thing I do want to point out with the reference is you can kind of tell just by looking at it. If you're looking at the waveforms, you can see, this is way more compressed here on this reference track because it's much louder. It's gone through compression and limiting, and especially this being a track that was produced about 20 years ago at the very peak of the loudness wars, you can see it's very compressed, especially in the main part of the track there. So speaking of that, we'll get into volume a little bit later, but let's talk about tone shaping now to start off with. So I'm gonna open up our 7-band EQ. This is just a standard Pro Tools EQ. Again, we're using basic free plugins here so that anyone can kind of follow along. And I'm going to make some really subtle tone adjustments. Now, again, you want to be even more careful here than we were in the mix phase. So I think in the mix phase, we were talking about making adjustments, maybe 3-4 dB sometimes. But in the mastering phase, you want to be doing, even less than that, maybe a dB or two here and there, just to correct some really kind of overall corrections. Because remember, everything we do here is going to be affecting the entire mix. So there's a lot less leeway for error, basically. So I'm going to unbypass this plugin, and I'm going to just talk about what I did here real quick, and then I'll let you hear it. So on this first lower middle frequency here, I have it set around 210 hertz, and I'm just using this point here to kind of pull out a little bit of muddiness from the mix. I wanted to kind of have it sound a little bit more open. And so I pulled out a little bit of that lower mid sound there. And then also, again, that's kind of the overall theme here. When I was listening, back and forth with the reference track, I thought this track had a little bit of muddiness to it. And so I just wanted to kind of enhance the top end a little bit. So you can see I have another boost here at around 1.6K. Again, only 2 dB, really, a 1Q, so a nice, really broad boost. And then I also have a high shelf, adding little high frequencies back into the mix there as well. And then I have a little cut here at 2.5. Now that's helping me remove a little bit of the fizzle from my virtual amp simulators. That tends to happen sometimes when you're using the virtual guitar amps. And so I was boosting my top end overall, but that little frequency was a little bit of a sticking point. So I wanted to pull that down a little bit. And so that's basically it. I have those 4 moves, very few dB. Now this is going to be very subtle over Zoom, but I'm going to give it a shot here. I'm going to play this for you, and we'll start out with nothing engaged, and I'll engage them one by one as we go here. Bypass. So again, it's super subtle. I think the most obvious is probably that high shelf. If you're listening to the hi-hats or the drums, if that's coming through properly, you might be able to hear that. Now I'm going to start bypassed, and then I'll enable all 4 points at once, and hopefully you can hear a subtle difference. So we're off right now. And just to give you an idea, I'll be a little bit more drastic on some of these, just so you can kind of hear what they're doing. So here, let's play this back. If I rip this lower mid out, you can hear how it takes a little bit of that lower end mud. Is the super low end is still there. It just takes away a little bit of that boxiness. Now, of course, we don't want all that, but that just shows you kind of what happens there. Now, if I had a thinner mix and maybe I wanted a little bit more here, I could boost this a little bit. So here's boosted and cut. I can show you that same thing here on the shelf. Or actually, let's listen to this high middle frequency here. This is a good one. Hear how when I turn that up, that kind of that airy sound in the guitar, it's a little bit harsh, just poking through a lot. So I'm just going to pull that out like we had before. And so you can see nothing I'm doing here is really too intense, mostly, about 2 dB. And again, it's probably on the higher end. We're just trying to make these changes a little more obvious for you to hear over Zoom. But yeah, so basically I had just kind of cleaned up the mix just a little bit, very subtle changes, just trying to, and you can do that when you're going back and forth with the reference track and kind of give yourself and keep your ears in perspective as far as the tonality of things. So once you get that somewhere in the ballpark, we can move on. Now we'll have to go back potentially and check that later because of course, we have a signal chain going here. So, everything I'm doing downstream from that EQ may change the sound a little bit, but we'll see as we go. So the next thing I'm going to do before I go ahead and use a limiter to bring the volume up on this is I'm going to do a little bit more compression. So there's a few different techniques that you could employ here. Now, one technique I want to use is called parallel compression, or formerly known as New York compression. You may have heard it was made popular here in New York, I think back in the 80s. So basically, it's a very fancy word to say that we're going to compress a signal a lot or process a signal and then mix it with the original signal. And that allows us to basically kind of maybe go a little bit harder on the compressor than we normally would. Because if we did that without mixing the dry signal, it just wouldn't sound good. But by mixing the two together, you can kind of get away with a lot more on the compressor. And so we're going to use that to kind of get a little bit more out of the drum tracks here without having any access to the individual tracks. So what I've done here is I'm setting this up kind of similar to a bass or snare drum, compressor, kind of like you would set up for parallel compression, similar to a drum bus. And I'm going to go for about 8 or 10 dB of reduction. Again, that's a lot over a mix, so you would not want to have that at 100% mix, and I'll let you hear what that sounds like. But yeah, let's take a listen. So first I'm going to go ahead and I'll let you hear the setting I have it set at now, which is kind of where we want to end up. So I'll leave it bypassed, and then I'll play it. I'm going to turn the mix up now so you can hear, and it's very subtle there, but now if I turn this all the way up, you'll kind of hear what's going on. So hear how that's definitely sounding a little bit distorted, not where we want to leave it, but you can hear how it's kind of pulling my snare out and kind of making it sustain a little bit more. And so that's a kind of a cool sound to bury into the mix, even though we wouldn't want to have that be the whole mix. And that's basically the essence of parallel compression. So it's a really popular technique on drum buses, vocal buses, but you can use it in mastering if you're very careful, using it to taste. Again, you want to pull this mix knob somewhere around 20, 30%. Use your ears. And then the other thing I'd mention with the compressor that's going to help you manipulate this is your attack and release. You want to make sure those are relatively short, just long enough to let your transients come through. And then also you can experiment with using your filters for for your side chain of the compressor. So the side chain, in this channel strip, it's down here, is basically altering what triggers the compressor. So for example, if I pull this high pass filter down, where it is now, I have this set at around 100 hertz. And that way there's no super low end sounds that are going to trigger the compressor, and that's just a way of kind of cleaning up the way things work. So you would experiment with rolling off the low end or using a high pass filter on your side chain is one way to do that. And then as well, experiment with your attack and release here as well. And then just mix it to taste. And that's what we've done here. So let's give it a listen again. This is on. Off. And there you have it. Again, very subtle. If you don't have headphones on, you probably won't hear it. But these are the little things in the mastering stage, kind of like when we're mixing. All these little things kind of add up to making our track sound like a more polished, release-ready track. While I'm in here, I'm also using the console plugin to add a little bit of harmonic distortion. That's a very subtle thing as well that I can add in here. So again, that's going to kind of just help glue things together a little bit and just kind of help our overall mix. So that's all I'm using in this channel strip. I'm not using the EQ. Basically just our compressor and also, of course, our harmonic distortion. So that's what's happening here. So now we get to the fun part, the part where we kind of take that volume and bring it up to where it would be on a normal release, and we can start listening to it on our playlist along with our other tracks, and it's going to hold up, right? So a lot of things have changed over the last few years or 10 years or so, or as far as loudness is concerned. So anyone who's around my age or older will remember the loudness wars from when CDs were the main form of distribution. And basically with that, when we used to master for CD, basically you were mastering to a peak level of 0. And so you can kind of see that here, where you basically bring your top peak all the way up to 0, and then after that, you don't turn anything else up anymore. So the only way to get more volume out of that is to use compression. You lower the peak, and then you can bring up the overall signal, kind of like you see on this reference track down here. Now, with streaming services lately in the last few years, the whole idea of doing that before was that if you were on a radio station or if you were on a playlist, you wanted your song to be louder than the song before it. Like it's kind of a competitive advantage type of thing. And but that's not as much of a factor these days with streaming services because they end up normalizing or turning down songs that are too loud anyway because they want you to be able to create playlists that all kind of match each other. So I say all this just to say that you don't have to worry about mastering for loudness as much as we used to. And so, because of course, if you try to get too loud, it can sound really bad. And there's actually some, I won't name any names, but there's albums that are just talked about from that era that, may have sounded a little better if we didn't compress them quite as much. So something to keep in mind. So how do we know what level to master to? Well, the popular form of measurement these days is a measurement called LUFS, LUFS. And that's kind of it's kind of like a RMS. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but let's take a look at the Pro Tools meters here. I'm going to mute my track so we don't have to listen to it. But if I play it, you can see right now, this is a peak meter. It's showing me the very top peaks of the audio. If I change it to a RMS meter, you can see my signal level looks like it's dropped, and that's because it's showing me the average. So LUFS is basically kind of like an RMS reading, but it's a little different because it's basically, it's going by what the human ear perceives without getting into too much physics here. And so what's handy about that is we can kind of use that to give us a guide on how loud our track really is. So what does that all mean? So I have a meter here that I'm going to use to measure this. It's called the Yulin Loudness meter, and I'm using this because it's free. There's a lot of great tools out there, but again, I wanted to keep this set up so that anyone can kind of follow along. So I've inserted this on our master. And so that way we can kind of see what's happening. So let's just play this without any kind of limiting and see where we're at. Great. So the number we're going to look here at is this integrated LUFS number, and that's minus 16.5, as you can see. And that's actually right around the level that I believe Apple Music is turning stuff down to. So Spotify is around minus 14 right now. So you might ask, well, do I want to go any loud? Is it okay to go any louder than that? And it definitely is. There's a lot of, I think this reference track I pulled up is the LUFS is around minus 7 or something like that. So that's really aggressive. But as a general guideline, it's going to depend on the genre that you're working in. If you're doing some jazz or classical music, you probably want to be in this area. But for your more commercial type of releases, rock, hip hop, EDM, R&B, you're going to want to probably be definitely below or above minus 14. I think anywhere above 10 is fairly safe. And so what I'm going to do now is we're going to kind of move this over here, and I'm going to use my limiter to kind of increase the track volume without getting too loud, because you'll see how it can start to get crunchy, and there is a point where it becomes too much. So I'm going to unbypass my limiter, and before I start, I'm going to set my ceiling, which is where the top level peak is, just below 0. Just a little buffer here about 0.4 dB. This just gives a tiny bit of headroom for when you're uploading to streaming services in case any processing happens. It's imperceivable, but it does leave a little bit of space. And then all we do is turn this threshold down and the volume goes up. So let's try it out. We'll start at 0. Whoop. And if you watch that short-term LUFS number, it's going to go up as I turn this down. Now, the other thing that we want to keep an eye on as we're doing this is attenuation. You don't want to see, even 2.6 dB is a lot, but I know this isn't happening very often. So what you want to keep an eye on is how much you're attenuating. And once you start to get too high, you'll start to hear it. So let's keep an eye on attenuation. Just keep on listening here, and we'll find a threshold. All right, that's about as aggressive as I think I'd want to get. We're just above, around 10, 11 LUFS. And for this track, I think that sounds good without getting too distorted. You can see that 3.4 dB attenuation is a lot, but it looks like it's happening pretty rarely on some isolated transients. So I'm going to give this a little bit more room, move this up a couple tenths of a dB, maybe 7.2. Let's try 7.0, and we'll reset this and play it one more time. All right, I think that's a pretty good spot. Now, just to give you an idea of why we don't want to go too much, let's just take a listen to what happens as I start to increase this threshold too high. I think even over Zoom, you could tell that's getting really crunchy. Now, you may have different results depending on what plugin you're going to use, but there's always going to be a point where that happens. And so in this case, we were around low, high 7 LUFS, way louder than I need to be. So I'm just going to back this down back to around -7, and I think that's pretty good. So I'm going to basically, I'm pretty much done at this point. Did we draw our volume fade in there? Yes, we did. And so, yeah, I like the way the track starts. I think we have a good sound overall. So before I make you listen to this again, let's go ahead and I'm going to bounce this out and bring it back into the session so we can compare the waveforms and see what it looks like compared to this reference waveform too. So same procedure as before. I'm highlighted the length of the track here. I'm going to go to File, Bounce Mix, and we'll call this the pre-master. We'll just call this the master live stream. And let's go ahead and bounce that. Okay, so now I'm going to go to Finder here. Here's my master that just bounced. We're going to drag that back into our session over here. All right, now I'm going to kind of make these a similar. So here we are. You can see that our master, let's take a look. Oh, I dragged it onto the Landr. Let's put it here. We'll get to Landr in a little bit. So if I make these the same size, so you can get a fair comparison, or make them both a little bit bigger. But yeah, it's clearly obvious, of course, that our waveform here is much more compressed. And it's not quite as compressed as our 2003 Jimmy Eat World song, of course, but it's up there. And so let's give a listen back and forth between these two, and the pre-master and our master. Now I'm going to just turn these plugins off so you can hear the original mix at the top, and then you'll hear the master come in, and it's going to be very obvious because at first we're going to let you hear the volume jumps. So here we go. So that's off, and here comes the master. Regular. Master. You can hear we have our nice little old school fade out going on there too. You may have noticed too, our compression even brought up the levels of that verse relative to the chorus as well. There, kind of made them a little bit closer. And so there we have a pretty solid sounding master. So now I would like to go ahead and let's take a listen to. Oh, actually, that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to bring this master. Let's take a listen to these two with a volume match and see if we can still hear any kind of subtleness between them. So let's pull down this master volume a little bit and try to match it with our live stream. Let's see. So yeah, you can hear, even when I've tried to volume match those, you can still hear a little bit of a difference between them. The master that we did is a little bit more open because of those EQ cuts and boosts in the top end that we did. And so, yeah, it's always a good idea to try to reference between your pre-master and your master with some volume matching, at least when you're comparing the tone of the mix. But yeah, I think we have a pretty decent start here. Pretty decent master. So.
John, we had a question come in from online asking, what is RMS?
Oh yeah, awesome. I as soon as I said that, I realized I kind of opened up a can of worms. But basically, there's the two different methods of metering, and so I showed it for a second earlier, maybe right after he said the question. But it's a different method. It's basically an average of the level as opposed to just the peak level. And so, you know, if I play the pre-master here, mute these other tracks. So see this meter here. Right now it's on a sample peak. And so right now I'm peaking at around, you know, minus 4.3. It's showing me the peaks kind of in an instantaneous way. Whereas if I switch this to RMS, which stands for root mean square, it's more of an average reading and more, you know, kind of a more perceived level. So you can see the peaks are kind of at the top here still, but you're seeing where most of the audio is. And so it's almost a more, I don't want to say accurate, but as far as perceived loudness, it's a little bit more of an accurate measurement. And then LUFS kind of takes that to another level by kind of factoring in the human ear and some physics that go beyond my capabilities. So yeah, hopefully that helps. But awesome. So this is actually the perfect time to jump into our next step, which is I'm going to go ahead now and kind of hit the pause button because we're basically done with this master here. It could go out the way it is, but just since we have access to this Landr platform, let's go ahead and master it in there as well and see how it comes out. See what we like better. So Landr, as I mentioned earlier, is included with our Focusrite Scarlett interfaces. You get a couple of months free of Landr and a few masters that you can use. There's a lot of different things happening in here, but we're just going to talk about the mastering and then a little bit of the distribution side at the end. So for the master, basically I can go ahead and drag in the master that we did earlier, that file that we bounced out. Now I did that ahead of time so that you wouldn't have to watch it analyze the file for a few minutes. And so what I basically did was I went and bounced out this file here with the fade on it. So that way, this will match up basically to our master without any plugins. So we have a fair comparison. And so if I open this up, just so you know I'm telling the truth, let's go to our original. We'll hit play. Oh, let me just switch this so you'll hear it. So that's our original in Landr. And that's our original mix in, from Pro Tools, from before we added our plugins. So let's go ahead and see what Landr does. Now, Landr basically uses AI to kind of predict all those different settings that we made before, all the EQs and the compressor settings and limiter settings. It's using AI to analyze the track and kind of make decisions for you. So you can use these guidelines down here. You can also, if you had a reference track you were using, you can even upload that, and it'll it'll reference the track in order to make the decisions. But even without a reference track, let's just hear what we got right off the bat. Now I am going to select the open style because that's what we kind of went for, more of an open airy kind of a mix. And I'll keep the loudness at the medium setting. The high setting is pretty loud, but yeah, let's give it a listen. This is the original and mastered. So let's go ahead and create that. Not a whole lot of different choices to make here. So let's give it a shot. Let's say create master. Now, I mentioned this before. It's giving me the option of MP3, and I have unlimited of those with this plan, or the waves. I think you get 5 of those with the package that we offer. Again, if you can use wave, you always should. Let's go ahead and do that. And it's telling me down here that it's mastering, and that takes about a second or two. And so we'll wait for that. In the meantime, coming back to Pro Tools, when that's ready, I'm basically going to take that file. We're going to drop it in here, and we'll compare the 2 masters. While that's mastering, another cool thing about Landr that is really fun is that you have this distribution tab over here. So within this same platform, you can actually put your songs onto Spotify and Apple Music and all the other streaming platforms right from inside of here, which is really awesome. And there's a few different other options as well. You may be familiar with DistroKid is one of them, TuneCore, lots of different methods for getting your tracks out there. It's never been easier to distribute your music. So it's pretty awesome stuff. Let's take a look at how we're doing here. Still doing the master. So the AI takes almost as long as we did, right? All right, here we go. We got a master here that we can download. So yeah, let's go ahead and download that as a wave. And let's bring it into Pro Tools and check it out. Okay. So I'm going to drag this up here a little bit. So there you go. Actually, even just looking at them right off the top, it looks like mine is even a little bit hotter than the Landr master. But let's give a listen. We'll see what we like best. So we'll start with the pre-master, then I'll move to mine, and then we'll go to the AI master. That's Landr. Mine. Definitely a little bit of a difference there. I think that the Landr mix is still not quite as open as the master that we did. Let's give it one more listen. This is ours. Yeah, a little more low end there. I'll keep it on. And ours. Yeah, they're definitely a little bit different. I think the volume level's pretty similar, which is good, but there's definitely some more mid-range in the master that we did, which I kind of like. But what's cool about the Landr system is that if I wanted to, I could go back in here and I could say remaster. And then you can give it feedback basically, or what was it? Not it was, here it is, revision. And you can basically give it feedback. So I could say revise master and say like, yeah, the loudness was pretty good. We didn't have any distortion, but maybe we thought that you can actually tell it. Like I thought the mids were, I thought the mids were a little bit muddy, or the lows were. You can actually give it some guidelines and then revise. So let's play it. Yeah, I think that's actually just to listen and reference. So if I listen and reference here, so for example, I could say I think that the lows are boomy and my mids are weak, and that my vocals and highs are good, and I can say, and maybe I even want to tell it to make it, I can say it's too quiet, and I'll just revise it again. And we'll see what we get. We'll give it one more try, and then we'll wrap things up. So let's go ahead and make another track. Okay, should be done any second now. Any other questions while we're here?
Yes, we do. Is a lower LUFS value a louder perceived sound?
Yes, because it's actually
And if you could dive in while you're answering it, if you could dive in for the peasantry like myself, who I'm kind of lost on it altogether. So how does it kind of, if you can do like an explain like I'm five version?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I did kind of brush over that. So here we got, well, that's pretty much done. Let me just bring that into the session and then we'll cover that one more time.
No problem. No, you're doing a great job. You're stuck with people like me, John.
No, it's all good.
I think it really helps people appreciate what goes into music creation. I think we kind of all just think that have this simplified version of like, okay, there's talented people and they just do stuff and it comes out.
Yeah, that's a great point. Real quick before let's go ahead and do that. So I should pull up my meter here again. Okay. So because LUFS is a negative number, the higher the number, the louder it's going to be perceived. So, but just don't be fooled by that negative number. So just to be clear, like -10 is going to be louder than -14, just like negative. So it's not an inverse relationship, but that negative number can throw you off. So, but yeah, LUFS is basically, getting back to that metering conversation, the peak metering, like I explained earlier, it's measuring the very top of the waveform. So it's basing it off of that, and it's like an instantaneous reading. So it's not really giving you a great perceived loudness, because you might have a peak. If you have a very dynamic song, your peaks are going to be a lot higher than your program material. That's why, for example, if I was to turn, this is a really good way to describe it. So. Let's take a look at my master and my pre-master. Let's just say I took my master and I gain it down by 3 dB. Whoop, not that. This guy, where is he? There it is. So look, so now that looks like it's going to be quieter, right? But I bet you it's not. Let's find out. About the same. Still a little bit louder though, right? And that's because the average is louder. It's actually more loud. So those are the two different ways of. So if I look at the meters on these tracks and I switch these to, these are both on RMS metering, we should have a pretty similar look on this. Yeah, see that? But if I switch these to peaks, they're gonna look different. See how much more movement's going on over here? And so it's just a different way of measuring, the level of audio signals. And then LUFS is, again, it's kind of hard. It's a little bit hard to explain, but it's similar to an RMS reading. But I believe the way it's calculated, it's meant to be like the way the human ear perceives loudness. So it's supposed to be a little bit more accurate, basically. So without getting into physics 101, well, definitely not 101, but without getting into physics, hopefully that clears things up a little bit.
I think so. That was a nice explanation of it. And if we do have a follow-up, if there's any follow-up questions out there, please let us know.
I saw Pete mention that he also noticed there was a lot more low end in that Landr version. So I guess one last thing, since we did do that revision, let's see if it kind of cleaned that up a little bit, because I did tell it to kind of calm that down a little bit. What was the changes that we made here? Let's take a listen to it. So this is the old one from Landr with it does have a lot more bass. I can hear it here. So I'll play that first and I'll switch it. Yeah, I like that one a lot better. It seems a little bit more balanced to me. I'm actually going to compare that one to the master that we did. I have a feeling it'll be a little closer. Let's take a look. Here's ours. Yeah, it's still a little bit darker, but definitely different than this one, which is a little bit too booming. So we kind of have like the darkest, a little bit less bright, a little less dark, and kind of a brighter master here. But that just goes to show you, as we were saying in the beginning, there's not always a wrong answer necessarily. It's a lot of times it's the sound that you're going for, and so yeah, that's two different ways of mastering. Yeah. Any other questions while we're here?
Nothing right now. That's that seemed pretty simple. Like all things considered, obviously, not saying simple in that terms, but compared to what you did in the first two episodes, that just seems like really, I mean, when you knock it out of the park, is it similar to photography where you get it right in camera and you don't have much to do on the back end, or is it kind of where you always need a little bit of polishing?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. Yeah, you definitely always need to master to some level, but sure, I mean, depending on the mix phase, there can be more or less to do. Another part of mastering I didn't get into a lot is problem fixing. Sometimes you get a mix because if I had a problem, I can go back to my mix and just bounce it back out again. But and then a lot of times now people are mastering their own stuff. But yeah, certainly if you're a mastering engineer who gets a track, there's a lot of things. That's where things get really tricky. When you need to kind of correct the mix a little bit, like, oh, my bass is too loud or my snare's popping out. And then you can get into some of those really cool, compression tricks and stuff to kind of fix problems. We didn't have to do a whole lot of that here, but yeah, so it definitely helps if you have a good mix, 100%.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've probably told you this in the past. I've been, in the studio with friends, and you hear the engineers talking when all the artists leave, and you just have the engineers talking, and it's like, the off the record, like, oh, what this person gave us or this person brought us, because a lot of times, especially now in the this age where people will record, might record their verse offsite, and then they're sending something over, and it's like, wow, this was horrible, and hearing what they had to do and then to get everything on the same page and make it sound cohesive on the same track.
Yeah, I mean, because that also applies when you're mixing. It's a lot easier to do a good mix if you have amazing tracks, and anyone who's had both will know the difference. I mean, there's tons of really good multi tracks you can find on the internet, right? And so you'll find that. I won't mention exactly what they are, but we've probably heard them. And you throw those up in your software, and you just put all the faders at 0, and you're like, wow, sounds almost like the record, right? And so yeah, that there is something to that for sure. The better you can get it, the earlier, the better it is. Just like photography, video, same thing.
Awesome. Pete joining us on YouTube asking, well, he says, I use studio monitors all the time. Everything sounds harsh to a great extent. What sources do you use for playback testing before you finalize your masters?
It's a really good question. So much goes into that. I would say, if your monitors are sounding harsh to you, I wonder if you've tried different sets of studio monitors to begin with. It also could be just the way your room is treated. If you're using studio monitors but your room isn't really treated properly, you're not getting a lot out of the monitors, and you might be better off with a good pair of headphones, depending on your setup. And so I do use headphones I at least always check in headphones. I would definitely advise, unless you have a really nice, or even if you do have a nice treated mix room, but especially if you don't, have a pair of headphones that you trust as well, and then of course, as many different sources as you can listen on, the better. So, I do the car trick like everybody else. AirPods or any kind of earpods is always good. Your iPhone, just anything that people are going to listen on. Even when I used to work at a big studio, we had a little tiny computer speaker that sat on the mixing console that we could route audio to, just to hear I think it was like one of those little iMac speakers, just so we could hear like what it would sound like on that. So yeah, I'm all about monitoring on as many sources as possible for sure. And if you are using monitors, I would look into, it might be worth treating your space, or it may be time to investigate another pair of monitors, but because they all have different, different tonal characteristics. Just as a quick example, I'm using Atom Audio monitors, which is one of our sister companies, and they're known for their ribbon tweeters, and that has a very unique sound on the top end. For people that actually can help, a lot of people find that's a less harsh way of listening, and some don't. So it's something. It may just be finding the pair of monitors for you.
You brought up a question in my mind here that I'm going to ask. It's off topic, but I got you here, so I'm going to ask it. When I see some studio setups or just rooms that people have treated, what is the purpose of? Sometimes you'll see like the sound deadening, just like the squares spaced out. What does that do, and why is it? Why don't you have a whole wall treated, or what's the purpose of just the sporadic
Yeah, well, it
treating?
depends. Like when you're treating a room, you can get very scientific about it and try to figure out exactly where those squares kind of go. But I mean, basically, what you're trying to prevent is reflections. So you're not sound. When you say soundproof, a lot of people may think like, oh, you're trying to prevent sound from getting into my neighbor's apartment. It's not. That's not what we're talking about. We're trying to get sound to stop from bouncing off our walls and back into our microphones or interfering with our speakers. So again, without getting too deep into physics, you may have heard the term out of phase before. A sound is a wave. So if you have a sine wave like this, and it's at a certain frequency, and it intersects with another sine wave at the same, when they intersect, they can add together or they can subtract from each other. That's what out of phase means. And so you want to minimize that as much as possible. And then depending on the shape of your room, the different frequencies that you're trying to compensate for you may have heard of a bass trap, for example, like that you would put in a corner. So that's a whole different thing where you're trying to, if there's a lot of muddiness kind of building up in your room, you put a bass trap in the corner. So yeah, it can get pretty complicated. I would say, I know like the companies that sell that stuff, like RLX and a few of the other ones, they have a lot. They definitely have a lot of support material for that to give you more information. But in essence, you're just trying to, you're trying to stop reflections. When you're in your room, just do this, and if you hear a weird kind of, resonant frequency coming back at you, that's a problem right off the bat, So yeah, that's one easy way to know if your room is a problem.
Spare you guys the clapping. I'm going to do it as soon
But
as
that
I
being
laugh.
said, you mentioned too, you can kind of overdo it too. You don't want to put panels all over the whole room and now all of a sudden the room is 100% dead either. That isn't always desirable. I mean, mixing, maybe, but especially for recording, if you have a little tiny vocal booth and there's just soundproofing everywhere, it could just be, you can overdo it too, for sure. So like all of this, it's an art.
Awesome. John, this was great, man. This is as promised, a wonderful 3-part series, giving us the breakdown of creative music.
Yeah.
Any closing stuff? Anything we missed? Any loose ends?
Oh, I'm sure there are, but if anyone has any questions, or I'll try to check back in the comments in a few days and see. But yeah, I think that was most of it for today.
Awesome. Well, huge thank you to John DiNicola and the entire Focusrite team for making this happen. Again, this will be on the YouTube archive for you guys to watch as many times as you'd like. I think I need to brush up on my audio, so I better head over there once we wrap this up. Once I'm done clapping, I'm going to be clapping in my room the rest of the day to see what my sound sounds like here. But
that
John,
room looks pretty cozy. I think you'd be all right in there, man. I don't know.
I wonder. It's like, I don't know. I'm going to have questions. Look, we're going to have you back on. It's only a matter of time.
Yeah.
We love having you guys on and the information you bring, but I'm going to have plenty more questions from the intro 101 segment next time I see you.
Sounds good. I look forward to it.
Awesome. Sounds good, John. And to all of our viewers out there, like I said, head over to our YouTube. You can watch this as many times as you like, along with all of our other recorded content. But that's all we have. Another rendition of the B&H virtual event space now in the books. Catch y'all next time.